Hello again, Planeswalkers. This is Eric from Bane Alley Magic, bringing you another weekly deck tech video. And today we're talking about Maelstrom Wanderer. But before we get into the deck, I'd just like to remind you to please like and subscribe. I would love to have 100 subscribers, so if you can hit that subscribe button, I would definitely appreciate it. So, Maelstrom Wanderer is a 7/5 legendary elemental creature, and it's 5 generic, a blue, a red, and a green to cast. And the Wanderer says creatures you control have haste, and it has Cascade, which means when you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exiled cards on the bottom in a random order, then do it again. So, you get to cast 2 cards for free when you play Maelstrom Wanderer. So before we talk about how broken the Cascade triggers are, I want to talk about haste. In my opinion, haste is one of the most powerful effects in the game. It can be argued that flash is just as powerful or more powerful, but personally I think haste is better, and here's why. With haste, you literally get an extra attack step. Here's what I mean. Imagine this. Let's say during a hypothetical game you have a 1/1 creature with haste for 1 mana in your hand, such as maybe a, Raging Goblin here, right? So you have a 1/1 creature with haste in your hand. Now, you can potentially cast an attack with this creature on turn 1, right? Now let's say you also have a 1/1 creature with flash in your hand, such as Zealous Guardian here, alright? So you can cast the creature with flash on turn 1, but it will be summoning sick and will not be able to attack on your turn. It's not going to be able to attack until your turn 2. Yes, you can cast the creature with flash during your opponent's end step, and thereby you get that creature some protection it would otherwise not have, but as far as attacking goes, you get the same result. The creature with flash will not be able to attack until your second turn. If I ask a Magic player, what is the one deck that dominates all formats? They probably would not say Flash Tribal. They would say Mono Red Burn. In other words, cards like Goblin Guide, Monastery Swiftsphere, Legion Loyalist, Fanatical Firebrand, all those 1-drop creatures with haste. So, don't get me wrong, Flash gives you the ability to pull off some neat tricks, and in a defensive situation, it can be better than haste, in a defensive situation. But in general, I would say that the additional combat step haste gives you outweighs the defensive advantages of flash. And again, I would say that haste and flash are 2 of the most powerful creature abilities in the game. Think of it. Even if your creature has a plethora of other abilities like Double Strike, Hexproof, and Indestructible, if your creature does not have haste or flash, it will need to sit and wait through your opponent's entire turn. A turn where your opponent could draw a card, allowing them to destroy, enchant, exile, or even make you sacrifice your creature. With haste and with haste and flash, you have more of a guarantee that your creatures will do something valuable before they die. So Maelstrom Wanderer gives all our creatures haste, which is huge when we are cheating up to 2 of them out with Cascade. But because of Cascade, I have not included many cards I would normally include with these color combinations. The fact is, if the card revealed with the Cascade trigger is a counterspell, or a poorly timed board wipe, or maybe a poorly timed targeted removal spell, the spell could be totally useless, and it could even be harmful to us if we lose and it could cause us to lose the game, possibly, worst case scenario. So for that reason, many of my spells often come in the form of, many of my removal spells come in the form of permanents, and even though I'm playing blue, I am not running Cyclonic Rift or any normal counterspells. Because the Wanderer has a converted mana cost of 8, I have quite a bit of spells in the deck that have a converted mana cost of exactly 7, allowing me to get the most value out of the cascade triggers. So to wrap it up, the main idea of this deck is basically to ramp up as quickly as possible, cast huge creatures, and attack with them immediately. We are very aggro in the mid to late game, and we also splash in a bit of control to keep our opponents from getting more aggro than we are. So as far as what creatures I'm putting in the deck, it's not like there's a lot of creatures that synergize with being cast with Cascade or that synergize with having haste. It's just a good ability. We're just cheating these creatures out. So essentially, when you build your own Maelstrom Wanderer deck, don't copy mine exactly, make your own, but you can have fun with it. And basically, you want to make a Temur, that's our color combination, blue, red, green is called Temur. You want to make it a Temur good stuff deck, basically. So let's start with the creatures, and like I said, we want to ramp up early. So Elvish Mystic is a 1/1 Elf Druid for 1 green, and you can tap Elvish Mystic to add 1 green to your mana pool. Next we got Beast Caller Savant, 1 generic and 1 green for a 1/1 Elf Shaman ally with haste, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells. And look at that artwork, it's pretty sweet. He's got a snake around him. Next we got Sakura Tribe Elder, also known as Steve. Never underestimate a card that has a nickname. So Sakura Tribe Elder is a 1/1 Snake Shaman for 1 generic and a green, and you can sacrifice Sakura Tribe Elder and search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. This is one of the more powerful ramp spells in the whole game, very underestimated a lot of the time, but you got totally a free block out of this, because remember, you can sacrifice in response to damage after you've declared it as a blocker, so you're going to still prevent the damage as long as the attacking creature doesn't have trample. Next we got Naga Vitalist, 1 generic and a green for a 1/2 Naga Druid. Tap it to add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that a land you control could produce. Next is Zur-Ta Druid, a red and a green for a 1/1 human druid. Tap it to add a green mana to your mana pool, and whenever you tap Zur-Ta Druid for mana, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So not a creature that's going to make you friends, but you're playing Maelstrom Wanderer, so you already probably don't have any at the table. Next we got Weaver of Currents, a 2/2 Naga Druid for 1 generic, a green and a blue, and it says tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Pretty useful. Next we got our draw card creature spells. So Shaman of the Great Hunt is 3 generic and a red for a 4/2 Orc Shaman with haste, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And it has Ferocious, so you could play 2 and hybrid and 2 hybrid blue-green mana, so 4 mana total, and you get to draw a card for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. So this is great because it pumps up our creatures and then synergizes with its next ability, therefore, because if we pump our creatures up big enough, we get to draw a card for each one. Next we have Rajmi, Eternity's Crafter, 2 generic, a blue and a green, for a legendary Elf Druid, which is a 2/3. And Rashmi says, whenever you cast your first spell each turn, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card with converted mana cost less than that spell's, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you don't cast the revealed card, put it into your hand. The way this is worded is a little bit confusing, so let's just say, for example, you cast Rash Beam. It's not going to work during the turn you cast her, because she's going to at least be the first spell you cast. So on the next turn after you cast Rash Beam, let's say you cast Maelstrom Wanderer. Alright? So after you cast your first spell, reveal the top card of your library. Let's say that card is Shaman of the Great Hunt. So if the card you revealed is a non-land card with converted mana cost less than that spell's meaning the first spell you cast, if the card revealed has a lower converted mana cost than the card that you cast, then you get to cast that card without paying its mana cost. And even if you don't get to cast that card, you get to draw that card. So if you don't cast the revealed card, you put it into your hand. Not drawing exactly according to the rules, but putting it into your hand. Next we got Seedborn Muse, 3 generic and 2 green for a 2/4 spirit. And Seedborn Muse says, untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. So this is kind of, the legal version of Prophet of Kruphix. Prophet of Kruphix is banned because it has this combined with the ability to also play your creatures at flash speed, which, what do you know, that's what our next creature does. So we got Teferi, Mage of Zalfir, 2 generic and 3 blue for a 3/4 creature with flash, and it's a legendary human wizard. Creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield have flash. So this basically says every creature you control that's in your hand has flash. And it says each opponent can cast spells only anytime he or she could cast a sorcery. So suddenly your opponents can only cast spells on their turn. It's pretty sweet. Next we have Surok Dragonclaw, 2 generic, a green, a blue, and a red for a 6/6 human warrior with flash. And Surok Dragonclaw can't be countered. And he says creature spells you control can't be countered. And other creatures you control have trample. So believe it or not, Surok Dragonclaw was actually the previous commander of this deck. And you can actually switch him out pretty easily. Because like I said, this is more of just like a Temur good stuff deck, So currently we have all of our creatures having haste. Maybe in a different matchup you might be like, maybe I want to be more control. If you're playing more of the control game, you want to switch in Surok Dragonclaw so that all your creatures have trample and they can't be countered. That's the important thing there. All your creatures can't be countered. Especially powerful when you team that up with Teferi, and so they can't be countered and you're casting them at instant speed. Next we got Urabrask the Hidden, which is a 4/4 legendary praetor for 3 generic and 2 red. And Urabrask also says creatures you control have haste. And it says creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So not only are we gaining that extra combat step, but we are literally taking it away from our opponents. Next we have Atali Primal Storm, a 6/6 elder dinosaur for 4 generic and 2 red. Whenever Atali Primal Storm attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. This is especially powerful in Commander, where you have 3 opponents, so you're going to be casting up to 4 spells for free. And not only that, but, giving Atali haste, again, guarantees this happens. And normally when you cast Atali, everyone's freaking out. They're all searching for the removal spell right away. So this is where haste comes in really handy, just to make sure we definitely get that trigger. Next, continuing on creatures that give us card advantage, we have Consecrated Sphinx, 4 generic and 2 blue for a 4/6 Sphinx with flying. And it says whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. Yeah, this gets absolutely bonkers, especially when an opponent has Rhystic Study and they're drawing a card whenever one of their opponents casts a spell and doesn't pay for Rhystic Study. Well, suddenly you're drawing 2 cards whenever that player draws 1 card. So really, really powerful draw card spell. One that's a little pricey because it's one of the more powerful draw card spells in the game. But also remember your opponents are going to target it, so it doesn't hurt to give it haste and at least make sure it's going to get in for 4 damage before they blow it up. Next we have Niv-Mizzet Draco Genius, which is kind of the start of our creature-based removal. Right, so Niv-Mizzet is a 5/5 legendary dragon wizard for 2 generic, 2 blue, and 2 red. And he's got flying, like all the dragons do. And whenever Niv-Mizzet Draco Genius deals damage to a player, you may draw a card. And you may pay a blue and a red to have Niv-Mizzet Draco Genius deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So you're going to be drawing cards, but also this works as a nice little bit of removal, right? Help us ping off the little guys. And we have his counterpart, Niv-Mizzet the Firemind, 2 generic, 2 blue, and 2 red for a 4/4 legendary dragon wizard. with flying, and whenever you draw a card, Niv-Mizzet the Firemind deals 1 damage to target creature or player, and you can tap the Firemind to draw a card. So, also some targeted removal, also drawing cards, kind of the exact opposite of Draco Genius. I don't have Perrin yet, I haven't drawn one. If I did, I might switch it out, but no need. Next we have Nezahal, Primal Tide, 5 generic and 2 blue for a 7/7 legendary Elder Dinosaur. Nezahal can't be countered. You have no maximum hand size. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, draw a card. And finally, you may discard 3 cards, exile Nezahal, and then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Oh my god, I love this card. I love this card so much I'm seriously considering just building a Nezahal deck. It draws you so many cards all the time. It protects itself. It can't be countered. You have no maximum hand size. I mean, what else needs to be said? Very powerful, very great card. Goes in pretty much every blue deck that I own. Next we have Timestream Navigator, 1 and a blue for a 1/1 human pirate wizard, which has Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. And so, if you cast something with Ascend, you get the City's Blessing either when you cast it, or if you have a permanent on the battlefield with Ascend, and then you eventually get 10 or more permanents, then you get the City's Blessing. So, Timestream Navigator also says you can pay 2 generic and 2 blue and tap it to put Timestream Navigator on the bottom of its owner's library, and you get to take an extra turn after this one. Activate this ability only if you have the City's Blessing. So we love taking extra turns with this deck, getting in that extra combat step again. Next we have Eternal Witness, 1 generic and 2 green for a 2/1 human shaman. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Literally any card, which is why this goes in literally every green deck that was ever printed, and I don't really need to explain it. Continuing. Temur Sabertooth, 2 generic and 2 green for a 4/3 cat, and it says you can pay 1 and a green, and you may return another creature you control to its owner's hand. If you do, Temur Sabertooth gains indestructible until the end of the turn. Well, guess who we might be returning to our owner's hand? Maelstrom Wanderer, so we can cast it again and get Cascade again. For only 2 mana, this is a must include in any Maelstrom Wanderer deck. Absolutely. Temur Sabertooth just does bonker biscuits. Next we got Venser Shaper Savant. Nice tongue twister. 2 generic and 2 blue for a 2/2 human wizard with flash, and when Venser Shaper Savant enters the battlefield, return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. So this is our counterspell of the deck. So it works great with Maelstrom Wanderer because unlike other counterspells, if we reveal Venser with the Cascade trigger, it's not going to be a whiff. We'll at least get a Venser out of the deal. We'll be able to return a permanent to its owner's hand, but also if we end up getting Venser inside of our hands, it works like a counterspell. It can return a spell that's on the stack to its owner's hand. Next we have Perplexing Chimera. I always used to call it Chimera. I always feel like calling it Chimera because it just sounds funny. So the Perplexing Chimera is 4 generic and a blue for a 3/3 Chimera. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may exchange control of Perplexing Chimera and that spell. If you do, choose new targets for the spell. So this is again another sort of permanent form of a counter spell. It's not going to make us whiff if we reveal it off of the Cascade trigger, and we can use it anytime we want as long as it's alive. We can use it to essentially counter an opponent's spell and gain control of that spell. Next we have Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs, 3 generic and 2 red for a 5/4 legendary ogre warrior, and whenever a creature an opponent controls attacks, if you're the defending player, put a 3/3 red ogre creature token onto the battlefield unless that creature's controller pays 3 mana. So this is our little bit of our control-y stuff here. Just saying, you can't attack. If you attack me, I get a 3/3 red ogre creature token unless you pay 3. Pretty sweet deal. Goes in a lot of my red decks, especially any red decks I'm assuming might draw some hate. Next we have Molten Primordial, 5 generic and 2 red for a 6/4 avatar with haste. And when Molten Primordial enters the battlefield... excuse me. When Molten Primordial enters the battlefield, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until the end of the turn. Untap those creatures, they gain haste until the end of the turn. So, hopefully, when you got this out, you have some sort of sacrifice outlet. I don't think I actually have any sacrifice outlets in this deck. So maybe that's something you might want to add in, you know, Ashnod's Altar or some little form of sacrifice outlet is always a good thing to have, especially when you got spells like this that gain control of your opponent's creatures. You can sacrifice them before they get their creatures back. But our deck is so aggro, it doesn't entirely matter, you know. I mean, we're dealing so much damage with them anyway. This is mostly just, you know, removing their blockers so we can get in that damage. Next we have Wormcoil Engine, a 6/6 worm for 6 mana. It has Death Touch and Lifelink. It's an artifact, and when Wormcoil Engine dies, put a 3/3 colorless worm artifact creature token with Death Touch and a 3/3 colorless worm artifact creature token with Lifelink onto the battlefield. So it's the worm that doesn't die. Next we have Seki Season's Guide, which is a 0/0 spirit for 5 generic and 3 green. That's right, 8 mana. But it enters the battlefield with 8 +1/+1 counters on it, so it's going to be an 8/8. And it says, if damage would be dealt to Seki, prevent that damage, remove that many +1/+1 counters from Seki, and put that many 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens into play. And then it says, sacrifice 8 spirits. Return Seki from your graveyard to play. So, this gets us tons of spirits, all of which have haste, and then it comes back and it has haste and it can attack. Just actually a really good card for aggro decks, but also fits into a little bit of an ultimate combo we got going on. So, keep your eyes open for that. Coming up soon. Alright, next we got Galta Primal Hunger. 10 generic and 2 green for a legendary Elder Dinosaur, which is a 12/12 with Trample. And Galta Primal Hunger costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So, if Maelstrom Wanderer is out with a power of 7, then that means Galta is only going to cost 5 to cast. You know, these two make a lovely couple, don't they? Oh yeah, just look at them staring into each other's eyes. Continuing, we have Acidic Slime, a 2/2 Death Touch Ooze for 3 generic and 2 green, and when Acidic Slime enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. Yeah, solid removal. I'd recommend it for almost any green deck. Next we have Icefall Regent, 3 generic and 2 blue for a 4/3 flying dragon. And when Icefall Regent enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control Icefall Regent. Spells your opponents cast that target Icefall Regent cost 2 more to cast. So this is very much like the Frost Titan, which is coming up next. Very similar kind of control-y card. You can't get rid of this guy unless you pay extra mana. Taps down your things, and yeah, really great to give that haste. So next we got Frost Titan, 4 generic and 2 blue for a 6/6 giant. And whenever Frost Titan becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 2. Whenever Frost Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, tap target permanent. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So, remember that, you know, when your opponent casts the spell, you don't have to be like, well, just remember you have to pay an extra 2 to cast the spell. It doesn't say they have to pay an extra 2 to cast the spell. It says if they cast the spell, you get to counter that spell unless they pay 2. So, if you want to be, a little more controlly, a little more mean, you say, no, you cast that spell, now I counter that spell unless you pay 2, and if they forgot about that, then, too bad, then the rules say that spell just gets countered. And the ability, again, to tap an opponent's permanent down is just really annoying for your opponents, especially when you're getting in there with hasty combat damage and they really want to have a blocker out. Next we have Silverclad Ferocidons, which is another part of our removal package here. We've got 5 generic and 2 red for an 8/5 dinosaur. 8 power. Wow, that's really huge on the power here. And it has Enrage. Whenever Silverclad Ferocidon is dealt damage, each opponent sacrifices a permanent. Yeah, pretty brutal. Next we have Balefire Dragon. 5 generic and 2 red for a 6/6 flying dragon, and whenever Balefire Dragon deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each creature that player controls. So again, we got removal, but it's on a creature, so if we reveal this with the Cascade trigger, then we're not going to be bummed out. Whereas, if we put Hour of Devastation in this deck, then we're just going to get screwed, because Hour of Devastation is just going to kill all of our creatures at a time when we don't want it to. So instead we got our removal and things like that on permanents. Same with Terastodon. 6 generic and 2 green for a 9/9 elephant. When Terastodon enters the battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into the graveyard this way, its controller puts a 3/3 green elephant creature token onto the battlefield. So you could blow up 3 of someone's lands and give them 3/3 elephants instead, or 3 of anything that's not a creature. This is 8 mana, so it actually won't work with the Cascade trigger. But it is pretty solid removal in green. I love this card, and I love giving this creature haste. We do have to hard cast it, unfortunately, but pretty sweet. Alright, on to the non-creature spells, starting with some draw card spells. So in this deck, I do run Overflowing Insight, because I do have a lot of ramp in the deck, so I can actually get to this not quickly, but it doesn't take me too long to get to Overflowing Insight mana. So 4 generic and 3 blue for a sorcery. Target player draws 7 cards. Yeah, that'll do. Next we have Mystic Confluence. 3 generic and 2 blue. This is the only non-permanent counterspell in the deck because it gives us 3 choices. So choose 3, you may choose the same mode more than once. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Or return target creature to its owner's hand, or draw a card. So if we reveal this with the Cascade trigger, it's not a whiff, because we can just draw cards instead of countering a spell. Next we got Rhystic Study. 2 generic and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1 mana. So if you don't know, this is probably the most powerful draw card spell in the whole game. For just 3 mana, you could be drawing 5, 10... You could draw your entire deck with Rhystic Study, so be careful with it. Next we have Bounty of Luxa, 2 generic, a green, and a blue. For an enchantment, which is worded very strangely. They should have worded this a little differently, like they should put the last sentence first. Anyway, I'm going to read it. So it says, at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, remove all flood counters from Bounty of Luxa. If no counters were removed this way, put a flood counter on Bounty of Luxa and draw a card. Otherwise, add a colorless green and a blue mana to your mana pool. So, what this is saying, at the beginning of your first main phase, you either put a flood... If there's not a flood counter on it, you put a flood counter on it and draw a card. If there is a flood counter on it, you remove the flood counter and you get 3 mana. So basically, every other turn you're either getting 3 mana or drawing a card. So as weird as it is worded, super great card. Fantastic card. Has drawn me tons of cards, has got me the mana to cast those cards. I've played this card enough times to know that it works. It does the work. Sky Shroud Claim is 3 generic and a green for a sorcery. That says search your library for up to 2 forest cards and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. This does not say they enter the battlefield tapped. It does not say basic forests, So yeah, you can get 2 of your most broken forests and put them onto the battlefield untapped. Probably one of the best ramp spells in green, absolutely. Next we have Brass's Bounty, 6 generic and a green for sorcery. For each land you control, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So yeah, you get treasures equal to the amount of lands you control. Hopefully with Maelstrom Wanderer we can be casting this for free and just be getting a free 7, 8, 10 treasures out of the deal. Pretty sweet. Next we have Zendikar Resurgent, a card that should probably go in every green deck ever. So 5 generic and 2 green for an enchantment. It says whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. The types of mana are white, blue, black, red, green, and colorless. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. So this is giving you extra mana to cast creature spells, to cast all your spells, but whenever you're casting a creature spell, you get to draw a card, and you have extra mana again, so you can possibly cast that spell. If it's a creature again, you get to draw another card. So this can get out of control very quickly. It's a card that's not too expensive right now, so I suggest buying it while it's cheap, because man, in Commander, this card, it's a Mirari's Wake. It's just doubling your mana and drawing you cards, both in one card. Super great. Next we got Soul Ring. Next is Tempt with Discovery. 3 generic and a green for a sorcery, and has Tempting Offer. Search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. Each opponent may search his or her library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. For each opponent who searches the library this way, search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. Then each player who searched a library this way shuffles it. So you get to search for a land, you put it on the battlefield. It does not have to enter the battlefield tapped. Each opponent may do the same, and each one who does, for each one who does, you get to search for another land. So very often you're going to be getting, your Temple of the False God, or your Thespian Stage, and your Dark Depths combo, maybe, if you got those cards in your deck. Or, one crazy thing to do is to get a bunch of, land removal lands, like Wasteland and Ghost Quarter and things like that, and blow up everyone else's land that they searched for. Next we got Pier's Whim. 3 generic and a green for a sorcery. For each player, choose friend or foe. Each friend searches their library for a land, puts it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffles their library. Each foe sacrifices an artifact or enchantment they control. So yeah, removal and ramp on 1 card. Ooh, excuse me. Next for a couple more of permanent-based removal cards. So this permanent is Warstorm Surge. 5 generic and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So, if you haven't noticed yet, this is the combo piece with Seki. So this is a 2-card combo. So what happens here is Seki enters the battlefield with 8+1/+1 counters. It enters as an 8/8, and so it enters the battlefield, and Warstorm Surge says then, therefore, you're going to deal 8 damage to target creature or player. So you have Seki deal the 8 damage to itself. You then create 8 1/1 spirit tokens. When those 8 1/1 spirits enter the battlefield, you deal the 8 damage divided as you choose among all of your opponents. Then you sacrifice those 8 spirits to bring Seki back to the battlefield, right? And then Seki enters with 8 1/1 counters, and then you have Seki deal 8 damage back to itself. You create 8 spirits. Those 8 spirits deal the 8 damage to your opponents, and you do it all over again. Sacrifice those creatures to bring Seki back, and it's an infinite loop, infinite combo, as long as no one can, interrupt by exiling your graveyard or, blowing up your enchantment. So that is the one infinite combo in the deck. Next piece of removal, we got Sarkhan's Unsealing. 3 generic and a red for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6, Sarkhan's Unsealing deals 4 damage to any target. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 7 or greater, Sarkhan's Unsealing deals 4 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So what I love about this card is it turns all of our creatures into removal, right? It says every creature you cast is suddenly a minor removal spell. Super cool. And also the larger creatures you cast are board wipes. So Maelstrom Wanderer becomes a board wipe because Maelstrom Wanderer has power of 7. Yeah. Next we have Song of the Dryads, 2 generic and a green for enchantment aura, enchant permanent. Enchanted permanent is a colorless forest land. So yeah, say goodbye to fairy, now you're a forest. Next we got Chaos Warp, 2 generic and a red for an instant. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into his or her library, then reveals the top card of his or her library. If it's a permanent card, he or she puts it onto the battlefield. So, you know, there is a chance that they're going to get a permanent. There's a chance they're not going to get a permanent. But because of that, you know, you definitely want to save this for something really nasty. Absolutely, you don't want to just use it on any old thing, because they could potentially get something better. Burn Away is 4 generic and a red for an instant, and Burn Away deals 6 damage to target creature. When that creature dies this turn, exile all cards from its controller's graveyard. So this is really great against like the Scorpion God and the Locust God and the Scarab God, because once they die, they're not going to go back to their owner's hand till the end of the turn, but this is going to exile their whole graveyard before the end of the turn. Also, this is just really solid graveyard removal. 6 damage is pretty much enough to kill almost any creature on the battlefield. Now, going back to Chaos Warp, I forgot to mention that red has almost no ways of removing enchantments, so this is red's kind of one way of getting rid of enchantments. Also, you know, anything, planeswalkers, artifacts, lands, what have you. So, next we have Heroic Intervention. 1 generic and a green for an instant. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until the end of the turn. So, you know, if this is revealed off the Cascade trigger, it might be a little bit of a whiff, especially early game. But if we can get this into our hand, you know, it's really important for an aggro deck to have at least, you know, 1 or 2 spells that can protect the team. Next we have Worldly Tutor. 1 green for an instant. Search your library for a creature card and reveal that card to all players. Shuffle your library and put the revealed card back on top of it. So remember, the card goes back on top of your library, not to your hand. But what's great is that it's an instant spell, so you can cast this at the end of your opponent's end step, and then you draw that card right at the beginning of your next turn. So you do have to reveal that card, but if you do it at the end of someone else's, you know, of the last player's turn, then your opponents aren't going to have time to respond to you revealing that card. They're not going to have time to prepare for it. You're basically going to be just putting that card right into your hand for all intents and purposes. Next we have Death's Presence. 5 generic and a green for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control dies, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the power of the creature that died. So this is kind of just a little bit of reassurance to make sure that we stay aggro, right? Even if they kill one of our creatures, as long as one of our creatures is alive, that damage is still going to be going through. And next we have War's Toll, a very control-y card. 3 generic and a red for an enchantment. It says, whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, tap all lands that player controls. If a creature an opponent controls attacks, all creatures that opponent controls attacks if able. So this is great. Even though they have to tap all their lands, they can respond by tapping them all for mana. So, you know, it's not like they're going to lose all their mana, but they have to, what's important is they have to use all their mana in the same phase. You know, they can't spread their spells out between different phases. They have to use all their mana at once. And they have to attack with all their creatures if they choose to attack. Yeah, super broken. Great card from Battle Bond. Very controlling. Next we have Nim Deathmantle, 2 generic for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has Intimidate, and is a black zombie. Whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4 mana. If you do, return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Deathmantle to it. And it has equip 4. Unfortunately, this card is going to draw you a lot of hate, because lots of people, you know, as soon as they see it, they're going to be like, oh, infinite combo. I don't actually have the infinite combo in here, and so I'm probably going to take Nim Deathmantle out. If you want to know, that infinite combo goes with Ashnod's Altar, which, like I said a minute ago, I might consider putting in the deck, but I don't really have an infinite combo that works with it. It works with tokens, and it works with creatures that drain people of life. It doesn't really work with my deck. So I mostly put this card in here just to save my team. What's really great about it, and the reason that it kind of goes in any deck, the reason it's in my deck, is because you can just pay 4 mana and save a creature that's dying. And you can stack it, so you can do it multiple times and basically save your entire team from death, tokens and all. Well, no, non-token creature, excuse me. It definitely wouldn't work with tokens. But anyway, anything that's not a token, as long as you got 4 mana, you can save it with Nim Deathmantle. Next we have Loxodon Warhammer, 3 generic for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +3/+0, has trample and lifelink. So, you know, making Maelstrom Wanderer a 10/5 trample lifelink isn't so bad. Equip 3. We need to gain some life sometimes. I include a little bit of lifelink in every deck. Whisper Silk Cloak is 3 generic for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature is unblockable and can't be the target of spells or abilities. And it has equip 2. So getting in the combat damage with Maelstrom Wanderer is not unrealistic. You know, not combat damage, sorry, the commander damage. Killing someone with commander damage with Maelstrom Wanderer is definitely a possibility. Next we got Spell Twine, 5 generic and a blue for a sorcery. Exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, and target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard. Copy those cards. Cast the copies, if able, without paying their mana cost. Exile Spell Twine. So you get to cast something from your graveyard and something from someone else's graveyard for free. So great for only 6 mana. Next we have Primal Command, 3 generic and 2 blue for a sorcery, and it says choose 2. I love choices. So target player gains 7 life, or put target non-creature permanent on top of its owner's library, or target player shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library, or search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Whew, a lot of words there. Most of the time, I'm going to be using this to, you know, put something back on top of someone else's library, maybe shuffle my own library back, my own graveyard back into my library if someone's trying to mill me, or I've milled myself to death using something like Rhystic Study and Nezahal. But also, you know, being able to search my library for any creature card and putting it into my hand is, excuse me, pretty useful. I failed to say before, when we're tutoring for creature spells with Primal Command and things like, you know, the Worldly Tutor, most of the time we're going to be getting things like Galta, Primal Hunger, or we're going to be getting Teferi, you know, something control-y to bog our opponents down. We might get Seki, the Season's Guide, if we want to pull off the infinite combo. We might be getting Silverclad Ferocidons to make people sacrifice their permanents if we can't make them get rid of their permanents another way, or Frost Titan to tap down their aggro creatures. You know, lots of choices here in the good cards Temur deck. We got Wormcoil Engine if we need to gain some life, Molten Primordial if we want to gain control of their creature for a turn, Eternal Witness if we want to get something else back from the graveyard. You know, we got Venser if we need a counter spell. So yeah, lots of choices. Time Stream Navigator if we want to take extra turn as a haul, if we want to be drawing some cards. Niv Mizzet if we want to be, you know, dealing some damage. So those are some of the creatures we might be tutoring for with Primal Command. So next we have Vivian's Invocation, 5 generic and 2 green for a sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them on the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. When a creature is put onto the battlefield this way, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. So it's a little bit of removal and a little bit of you know, creature tutor there. Pretty sweet. And looking at the top 7 cards, I mean, it's pretty rare that we're gonna whiff with this one. And we, like I said, we got some pretty big creatures. Being able to put them on the battlefield for free is huge in this deck. Next we have Revenge of the Hunted, 4 generic and 2 green for a sorcery. Until end of turn, target creature gets +6/+6 and gains trample, and all creatures able to block it this turn do so. and it has Miracle for 1 green. So Miracle means you may cast this card for its Miracle cost when you draw it, if it's the first card you drew this turn. So you have to make sure you don't put it into your hand, so you prove to everybody that it's the card that you drew for the turn, you know. So as soon as you draw this, reveal it, and then usually what I'm doing is I'm giving Maelstrom Wanderer +6/+6 and trample, which is going to make him a 13/13, and hopefully get some commander damage through. Next we got Overwhelming Stampede, 3 generic and 2 green for a sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Which, you know, might be Maelstrom Wanderer, giving all of our creatures +7/+7, which is pretty huge when we cascade into this. Next we got Enlarge, same thing. 3 generic and 2 green. For a sorcery, target creature gets +7/+7 and gains trample until the end of the turn. It must be blocked this turn if able. So, you know, kind of also removal spell is what these are doing for me. You know, again, they're not targeted removal. So, you know, even if there's no target on the battlefield I want to kill, they're still at least going to be giving Maelstrom Wanderer +6/+6 or +7/+7 and getting that extra damage through. But if I do need to remove a creature, I can, you know, force all the creatures to block Maelstrom Wanderer to make sure that creature dies. Next we have Triumph of the Hordes. 2 generic and 2 green for a sorcery. Until the end of the turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and infect. So, you know, you just kind of win the game, hopefully, when you cast this, or at least take out 1 or 2 opponents. So if you don't know, infect means instead of dealing combat damage, creatures with infect deal damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters and to players in the form of poison counters. So a player who has 10 or more poison counters just loses the game. So essentially what infect means is if you get dealt damage by a creature with infect and you take 10 or more damage, infect damage, you just lose the game. So Maelstrom Wanderer and 1 or 2 other creatures is pretty much going to guarantee you're going to have enough infect damage to get through. And, you know, of course, this also gives you trample to make sure that infect damage goes through. And then that brings us into the lands. So we have a total of 37 lands, 17 basics, 20 non-basics, and 9 lands that enter the battlefield tapped. So the tapped lands are, you know, I mean, of course, we're playing with a little bit of a budget here, so I got a few tap lands, but they are, you know, they do have their uses. So we got Frontier Bivouac, which taps for a green, blue, or a red, but it enters the battlefield tapped. But hey, you know, it's a color fixer. Pretty sweet. I really need to get a command tower, though. You always need another command tower. Jeez, you know, every new deck you buy, you need a command tower, you need a soul ring, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, we got Sheltered Thicket, which is a mountain forest, which is the first of my cycling lands. So you can pay 2 mana to discard this card and draw a card. So it's cycling 2, and this enters tapped, and it adds a red or green. So cycling lands are really great for when you're mana flooded and you don't need any more lands, so you just cycle that land away and you draw another card instead. Next is Lonely Sandbar. It enters tapped, it taps for a blue, and it has cycling for 1 blue. So 1 blue, you discard it, you draw a card. Forgotten Cave enters tapped, taps to add a red, and it has cycling for 1 red. Slippery Karst, it enters tapped, it taps to add a green to your mana pool, and it has cycling for 2 mana. So there is the 1 for 1 green mana, I just ran out of them. Next we have Simic Growth Chamber. It's a land that enters tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps to add both a green and a blue mana to your mana pool. So this is a land that taps for 2 mana. The downside is you got to return a land you control to its owner's hand. So because of that downside, lots of players don't play with these lands, but man, I have played Commander enough. I will tell you, these lands are good. They are good. They do good things. If they're in your opening hand, they're not good, because they're going to make you discard a card if you don't cast any other spells before you play this card. But as long as you're able to cast a spell, empty your hand a little bit, you know, you return a land that you already tapped for mana to your hand, and preferably a land that's going to re-enter the battlefield untapped, you know. But I mean, I've seen these cards played 100 times, and every time the person ends up with extra mana later on, because they eventually replay the land that they returned to their hand, and now they got one additional mana than they would had they only had two lands that tap for one mana. So, you know, lots of people don't like these cards because they're horrible in 1v1, but we are in a format that is geared towards the long game, geared towards the end game, and these are great long game cards. So keep that in mind. Cards that are good in the long game are better in Commander. And so I only have one of these, but I mean, I might end up putting in more. So next we got Temple of Mystery, which is a land that enters tapped, and when this enters the battlefield, scry 1. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card onto the bottom of your library, and it taps to add a green or a blue mana to your mana pool, so a little bit of deck fixing. Same with Temple of Abandon. It's a temple, it enters tapped. When it enters the scry 1, it adds a red or a green mana to your mana pool. Temple of Epiphany enters tapped. When this enters scry 1, and it adds a blue or a red to your mana pool. Next we have Lumbering Falls, enters tapped. It adds a blue or a green to your mana pool, or you can pay 4 mana and it becomes a 3/3 green and blue elemental creature with hexproof until the end of the turn, and it's still a land. So if you look out there, there are plenty of lands that turn into creatures, and pretty much no matter what deck you're running, even monocolored lands, they're out there. There are monocolored lands out there that turn into creatures, so if you need some extra creatures, get them. Next we got Rootbound Crag, which is a land that enters tapped unless you control a mountain or a forest, and it taps to add a red or a green mana to your mana pool. So on the issue of tapped lands, I just want to say that my basic strategy is, you know, it doesn't matter as much in Commander, again, because we're a late game format, right? So in the early game, play all the tapped lands you can. You know, all the lands that are gonna enter the battlefield tapped, play them in the early game. You don't want to be late in the game and need 1 more mana, and all you've got is that mana that enters the battlefield tapped that you've been holding on to in your hand the whole time. You know, and you're like, oh, I only need 1 more mana to cast the spell, but the only mana I got left is the mana that's going to enter tapped. So play those tapped lands early on is the good strategy. Next we got Wooded Foothills. It's a fetch land, which means it's a land that you tap it, you pay 1 life, and you sacrifice it. With Wooded Foothills, once you sacrifice it, you get to search your library for a mountain or a forest card and put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. So that doesn't say basic mountain or basic forest, so, you know, we could be getting the Sheltered Thicket, for example, which is a mountain forest, and put that on the battlefield. And it doesn't say it enters tapped, so whatever you get doesn't have to enter tapped unless it says it has to enter tapped. Next we have Spire Garden, which is a land from the Battle Bond set. They have great lands. This taps for a red or a green, and it enters tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. So in Commander, we're pretty much always going to have this enter untapped. Pretty sweet. Flooded Grove is a land that taps for a colorless mana, or you can pay a green or a blue and tap it, and then you can add a green, green-blue, or blue-blue to your mana pool. Don't try giving one of these to a new player, because it's just going to confuse them so badly. I gave this to a new player once, and they just had no idea what was going on. I was like, it's the hybrid mana, you know, and then you pay that mana and you tap this to add 2 more mana. Like, why? They're like, why would I even do that in the first place? And I'm like, I explain, it's for mana fixing. That's the only thing this is about. It fixes your mana so that you can change, you know, your 1 blue and this into, you know, green, blue, or blue. If a spell you're casting specifically needs blue, for example, you know. So it's a mana fixing land. Hey, there's Command Tower. I thought I didn't have it, but I guess I do. Got Command Tower. It taps to add 1 mana to your mana pool of any color in your commander's color identity. So that's why it goes in pretty much every commander deck except monocolored decks. Next we got Thespian Stage. Taps to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can pay 2 generic and tap it, and Thespian Stage becomes a copy of target land and gains this ability, so it remains a copy of that land and keeps the ability to change into other lands. Very often I'm going to be changing it into another Temple of the False God. Temple of the False God is a land that taps to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool, but you can only activate this ability if you control 5 or more lands. You know, some of my friends have laughed at me before for owning this card, but to this day, I play Command. I mean, okay, today, the recording of this video, which is like December 11th, 2018, I have played Commander every day for the past like 2 weeks in a row, okay? And I will tell you, Temple of the False God has never failed me. I mean, I always end up eventually getting 5 lands because what have I said time and time again? We're a late game format. You know, we don't care about things that say, you know, ascend or that you need to have a certain amount of lands. You know, we're going to get there. And then we have Reliquary Tower. And it's a land that says you have no maximum hand size and you tap it to add a colorless mana to your mana pool. Very important in any deck that's running a Consecrated Sphinx or a Rhystic Study. And then we have Alchemist's Refuge, and it's a land that taps to add colorless, or you can play a green and a blue and tap it, and you may cast non-land cards this turn as though they had flash. So the unfortunate thing about Alchemist's Refuge is you're basically, you know, you got to save 3 mana in order to do that in the first place. So, you know, you're going to have 3 mana less to actually cast the rest of your non-land spells this turn, but, you know, whatever. It's a Vidalcan Orrery on a land, so that's pretty good. Next we have Ramanap Ruins, which is a desert that taps for colorless, or you can tap it and pay 1 life to add a red to your mana pool. And you can pay 2 generic and 2 red and tap it and sacrifice a desert, and Ramanap Ruins deals 2 damage to each opponent. I believe this is the only desert in the deck, so yeah, probably have to sacrifice Ramanap Ruins to deal that 2 damage to each opponent. I do want to get the green desert, I just don't have an extra copy. And that leads us into the basics. So with the basics, we have 5 mountains, 6 islands, and 6 forests, and that makes 17 basics. And that's the deck. That's Maelstrom Wanderer. So I hope you enjoyed the video, folks. If you did, please like and please subscribe. Like I said, my goal is to get to 100 subscribers as soon as possible. Let's say by my birthday, all right, which is July 12th next year. Right? I think that's a very reasonable goal. So, you know, within about 7 months, all right, please subscribe to the video. I need 100 subscribers so that maybe someday I could get sponsored, you know, and maybe do this for a reason. I'm also, you know, kind of running out of my own commander decks, which means I'm soon going to have to start seeking out other people, and that's just going to take time, you know, and time is work, and that is money. So help me out, hit that like button so I can keep making these videos for you and bringing you the content that you love. So, this is Eric from Bane Alley Magic signing off. Until next time, take care, take it easy.